Hello.
Our story begins with an accident, a mistake made while messing with the powers of the dark side. Inside the caves of Mustafar, a troubled Darth Vader walked into the tomb of Darth Momin. It had been years since he had been down here. The year was currently 6 BBY. Palpatine's Galactic Empire was thriving. The Sith were the most dominant they had been in thousands of years, and the thought of the Jedi returning was just as foolish as the Old Order had believed it was for the Sith. Sidious and Vader were perhaps at their highest point in their relationship since Anakin became Vader. They were tied together, trusting and operating on an almost perfect level. The rebels hadn't become a fully formed alliance. Lothal and Ferrix were simple fever dreams, and hope in the galaxy had vanished. Lord Vader, in his mind, was a free individual, someone that worked on behalf of his master. He wasn't a slave to the Sith or the Empire, so why was he below his castle, inside the tomb of an individual that betrayed him within his first few months of becoming a Sith? The answer was simple: curiosity. There were some offhand things mentioned to Vader by Momin during their short time together. One of these powers was flow walking. It was discovered by a small cult, but Momin had been a part of the base structure. He would have been the first Sith to access a power that was close enough to the world between worlds. He never completed his studies, and flow walking was lost to time. Vader wasn't unhappy with his circumstances, and while he had gone out of his way to forget about Kenobi, he wanted to finish what he started. Ever since his second loss to Obi-Wan, Emperor Palpatine forced his apprentice to forget the past. Prior to that defeat, Vader had the ability to pretty much do as he wished, under the Emperor's oversight of course. But that loss to Obi-Wan transformed their relationship for a couple of years. Sidious would use Vader's second loss, and even the first one, to Obi-Wan as venomous words to tick him off. Darth wasn't attempting the flow walk to find Padme, or to save his children, but to kill off Obi-Wan and deliver his lightsaber to Palpatine on Coruscant. It was a simple motivation: kill the Jedi Master and return his saber to Sidious to say, "I did it." Honestly, it had become boring for Vader too. That was the other large reason for doing this. Maintaining an empire wasn't exciting. Sure, there were rebel groups to kill off, but that only lasted for a small skirmish, not more than 30 minutes mostly. The campaigns were entertaining, yet it had just become muddled. Every time he won, it was triumphant, but there wasn't anything to champion for himself. There were no trophies or conquests that left him more fulfilled than he was before beginning. It was a job, and thus Vader felt bored. He was still loyal, that wasn't a question. There just weren't any challenges for him. The last true challenges were Obi-Wan and Yoda. Sidious didn't want Vader fighting the former Grand Master, so why not flow walk to find Obi-Wan and kill him? Aside from the few battles Vader saw, he rarely encountered Jedi. After almost losing to Seer, there hadn't been another difficult opponent. He'd kill a few knights or whatnot, or perhaps mutilate a band of priests that used the Force, but nothing compared to the duels he faced during the Clone Wars. He had all of this amazing training, one of the most accomplished Sith duelists of all time, and it was for nothing. Vader walked through the tomb. It was broken apart and mangled in debris. Momin was long gone, leaving Vader the freedom to explore this territory without voices inside of his head. There were some still intact books and holocrons that Vader would immediately use to begin studying from. It wouldn't be immediate, but eventually he'd have the knowledge to begin his flow walk. Initially, Vader had control over the Force power. He slipped through time portals and viewed the great abyss of time. In a way similar to the world between worlds, he saw flashes of history. The first of these were related to his life. Of course, these were the memories of Darth Vader, the easy things to digest. But Vader's control over the flow walk quickly changed when his life as Anakin Skywalker displayed itself. Padme's death on Mustafar, the last time he saw Ahsoka, the death of Fives, his mother's last moments alive, and learning of Qui-Gon's defeat on Naboo. All of these pieces of his forgotten life wrapped around him and submerged him into a place of pain and suffering, forcing his control over the flow walk into the hands of the Force itself. Vader felt trapped under the weight of 1,000 suns before it released and he was flung across the cave he started his journey in. though when he landed, he was unconscious. Vader eventually woke up, a few hours later, and shoved himself off the ground. There were voices coming from the edge of the cave, individuals speaking to each other about an energy surge. They quickly tried to communicate to each other about how close they were getting to the burst. Vader stumbled, using his hand to brace himself against the wall of his cave. He spoke out to the voices, telling them that there was no energy surge, just a simple mistake. The individuals down the hall cocked their blasters and demanded to know who it was. He explained that he was Lord Vader, and he asked if the Emperor sent them. Silence filled the hall as the men on the other side of the dark cave tried to figure out who the Emperor was. Their lights started beaming at the edge of the corner in the cave as they asked that Vader come out with his hands up. The Sith Lord mumbled to himself, "Those fools." He rolled his saber into his hand and ignited it. The Sith troopers watched Vader walk around the corner, and they on instinct opened fire at him. He weaved his weapon across his body, flipping his hand forward and force-choking one of the men. He stepped to the side, pulling his hand back and launching the crimson saber down the hallway. Vader watched their bodies fall into several pieces, before the last man in the squad was punctured in the stomach by the weapon. Vader ripped it back and extinguished the saber, placing it on his belt. Once he reached the dead bodies, he examined the armor. Vader was obviously pissed off to begin with, but these were not Imperial stormtroopers. Their armor didn't even have the logo of the Empire on it. He lowered himself to the ground and moved the closest body to him. The communication device was older than even he knew. Same went for their armor types, blasters and technological devices attached to their bodies. Vader, regardless of this, didn't think much of it. He assumed his master was playing a trick on him. The Sith Lord pressed himself to the ground and exited the cave to the sight of two marauders that questioned who he was, igniting their sabers in doing so. Vader demanded to know who they were, asking if they were Inquisitors or loyalists to Emperor Palpatine. The two of them, like the troopers, looked to one another, before asking who Palpatine was, what was an Inquisitor, and who the hell did he think he was for asking them. Vader ignited his saber, introducing himself and telling them he would not ask a second time. Neither had any interest in giving him an answer, so they both rushed in. Vader ripped his saber across his chest and knocked one of the attackers off their feet before parrying the next. Their weapons sizzled and he shoved down on them, forcing them backwards. Vader force-choked the other marauder and pulled him across the ground, impaling him with the Sith weapon and dragging his saber back towards the other. Vader told the survivor to give him what he wanted to know before realizing something. His castle wasn't even here. Not only that, but the terrain of Mustafar had completely changed in hours. Like how the lava rivers on the volcanic planet died down in the years after his duel with Obi-Wan. Mustafar was much different now. It was a rocky planet with clear skies. Not bright blues, but a tannish yellow. That was clearer than it had ever been during his stay. There were large and even growing mountains that would eventually become volcanoes, and Vader asked one more question. Where were they? The Marauder looked at his dead friend, who landed next to him on the ground, and told Vader everything he wanted to know. They didn't know about an Emperor Palpatine. They were Marauders for the Sith, and this was the planet of Mustafar. Vader stepped back, expressing under his breath that it could not be. He looked at the Marauder who pushed himself away from the Sith Lord, and demanded one more answer. Who was their leader? The Marauder looked up at the cruiser in the atmosphere and told his opponent that Lord Malgus was still the Sith Lord. Vader said nothing. Only his breathing apparatus echoed between them. He turned and looked at the cruiser that continued moving through the sky. Vader decided to spare the Marauder, reaching out his hand and helping him up. The Sith asked how he should address him, and Vader again thought. Call him Lord. Obviously, Vader too, but it sounded cooler phrased that way. The Marauder nodded and called for a transport. Now, the Sith Empire would not just accept anyone into their ranks. The individual Vader fought had no intention of doing it again. So, the question became, where did Vader fit in all of this? He'd already changed the lives of a dozen people that he killed on the planet, but what about this Sith Empire? Lord Malgus surely wouldn't be pleased with a challenger coming to face him, so that's what they wanted to know from Vader. What was he, and who did he plan on becoming? It was no secret that Malgus had already killed their initial Sith Lord, Vindican. That, though, was well over a decade ago. The reconstructed Sith Empire had moved on. Malgus was the champion of their regime, the individual who brought them back from the dead and gave them a fighting chance against the Galactic Republic. Vader nodded his head, asking where Lord Malgus was, and the crew of the vessel would not give him that answer. A terrible mistake. This was the real difference between Emperor Palpatine's regime and Lord Malgus' Sith Empire. No one would dare consider turning against Sidious with him in the picture. Sure, after Palpatine died, the Imperial warlords would do their thing, but never while he was alive, aside from the loose cannons. Here though, there was opportunity in everything. There were about a dozen Sith marauders inside of this very ship, and they would consider telling Vader where Malgus was for a chance to ascend within the ranks of the Sith Empire. This was true for everyone. If they could benefit from something, then why not give Vader a chance? And if Malgus was victorious against Vader, then they would tell him that they were just simply respecting the Sith Code, the one that Vader believed was the honor in being a Sith, to challenge one another, to claim victory. They had to respect that challenge of one Sith to another. Malgus could theoretically be not understanding, but chances are he would be, because he killed his own master at a point of vulnerability. Vader accepted these terms. If he won, this crew would be given a special honor, the one to serve beside him, and the Marauders, all 12 of the survivors, would have the chance of being treated differently, like disciples, if you will. Vader stood in the middle of the bridge with his hands on his belt, and told all of them that he would promise them, upon victory against this Sith Lord, that they would be made into an elite guard, one that would receive the proper training they deserved. They could be the champions of war against the Republic. Suddenly, Vader no longer felt boredom. He didn't feel like he was purposeless. There was a change he could make for himself here. Whether he truly flow walked or not, or if this was a vision or a dream, he didn't care. What he felt here and now is what he was searching for. First, though, instead of beginning a war against the Sith Lord of the time, he wanted to know everything there was to know. He had heard some statements or references made by former empires by his master, but nothing super in-depth. Vader truly didn't care about the past because it had already come and had gone. Suppose it doesn't matter until you're smacked in the face by it repeating before your very eyes. The next few days would be full of Vader learning about this era and how he could place himself within it as the new leader of the Sith Empire. His crew didn't inform the current Sith Lord of their predicament. Malgus had no reason to know. There were a few individuals that wanted to betray the crew, but the rest of them dealt with the mutineers and killed them. Vader had nothing to worry about, aside from just learning the important details of this time period. There were a few holograms, and he watched Lord Malgus fighting his opponents, and some of the great warriors of the Jedi Order. There were new strategies and treaties that Vader had to consider. That would come later, though. Vader needed to assert himself as the leader of the Sith Empire. After the studying and watching, he would depart for Alderaan, where Lord Malgus was beginning his siege. The Sith Empire was flanking the Republic, and Malgus planned to scorch the entire world. It was meant to be a prideful day for the regime. Vader, though, would make sure that he made this moment about himself. Inside the burning capital city, the Sith armies started marching towards their next target. Lord Vader arrived, with his 12 marauders beside him, and marched towards the center of the line. Darth Malgus was at the back of it, preparing counter strategies when he felt a disturbance. Several of the other Sith warriors got out of the way, so Vader could walk through the crowd. Thousands of soldiers were walking into the forests, and soon they would be ambushed by the Republic. Vader's breathing cut through their raging fires, catching Malgus' attention. He walked away from the strategy discussion and found a towering, dark, metallic creature. There was silence. The ancient Sith Lord versus the modern one. Malgus turned towards those around him to gauge their reactions, before asking Vader what he was. His saber ignited, and in that moment Malgus understood that this was a competition, one that he would win. Everyone backed away, and the other Sith raised his lightsaber with a flash of the blade. They eyed each other and stepped into a circle. Vader, master of all 7 lightsaber forms, versus one of the great warriors in all of Sith history. Their weapons moved into their comfortable forms, and Malgus, using his athleticism, bounced in. Vader parried, their sabers echoed outwards, and they spun around one another. Malgus ripped his weapon up and slammed down, but Vader didn't recoil as most of Malgus' opponents did. They continued moving around one another. Vader batted his saber up and overpowered the monster duelist. Malgus stumbled back, but recovered, as the troops around them turned their heads and rushed into a different direction. Neither Vader nor Malgus knew it, but the Republic had arrived, and Satele Shan was leading a counter-assault against the Sith. Vader rolled his weapon in his hand and paced away from Malgus, who palmed his weapon, gripping it harder and wishing to know whose name will be left to die here. Vader told his name and swung in, rushing forward. Malgus, unprepared for the aggression, moved into defense, slipping around his opponent, but being forced to deflect the incoming strike that shoved him into a burning building. Hate fueled them both. Malgus shoved forward, pushing Vader back. Their sabers clashed and shrieked as they tried to dominate the other. Malgus avoided Vader, who overpowered the strike and fell down into a building. He turned back and blocked an attack from Malgus. The Ancient Lord slapped his saber down multiple times before Vader used the Force and threw Malgus off of his feet and into a nearby building. Fire burned around him and Vader rose to his full height, telling the Sith that he would know how it feels to burn. Malgus raised his hands and kept the structure from falling on him. He avoided falling debris and exited just as the entire building caved in. Ash and soot covered the air, forcing the two opponents to fight one another by only using the other's saber as a target. Their weapons flashed at each collision. Vader overpowered Malgus with his metallic arms, but their skills left them to rely on talent alone. The burning city around them reminded Vader of the fight on Mustafar. Their duel continued to move the two of them across the crumbling city. They shared very few words with one another. Vader's disciples avoided the fight by watching from afar, but something else was becoming evident. Without Malgus or Vader present for the Force battle, Satele Shan was slaughtering through the Sith forces. Their marauders, droids, and soldiers weren't a match. When she caught wind of a duel between two Sith Lords, she understood this as her opportunity to rid the galaxy of two incredible threats. Vader and Malgus, though, did not stop fighting each other. Malgus didn't think to use electricity. The one time he did use it, his opponent blocked it. Vader was able to maintain his defense long enough that Malgus didn't see it as a weakness, and why would he? Malgus had no knowledge of Vader's past or the fact that his master would limit his potential. It wasn't exactly the most common thing, even thousands of years before the Rule of Two, for a Sith Lord to withhold his or her apprentice from reaching their full potential. Malgus didn't stop his assault though, and made for a unique dueling experience for Vader. Malgus was the most aggressive, acrobatic, and athletic opponent he fought since Obi-Wan. It was a challenge from inside the suit, but Vader frequently switched between forms and patiently landed his hits on his opponent's armor. None of these did significant damage for either side, but they led to the two warriors growing even angrier, impatient even. Neither of them, aside from making minor collisions, were getting anywhere. It was a battle of attrition, and Vader knew it would come to this. They eventually broke apart and started their pacing over and again. Vader's breathing remained the same, and Malgus had to stop himself, that he could breathe. He wanted to know what Vader was, but the Sith Lord had no interest in sharing that information with a dead man. Instead, Vader lunged forward and Malgus whipped his saber up and defended himself, before Vader shoved his opponent to the ground, and with the Force raised him into the air and slammed him down more times. Right before he could drive his saber through his opponent, Vader was launched from his feet and into a pillar before it fell down on top of him. A blue saber staff ignited, and Malgus shoved himself off the ground, attacking Satele Shan. The Jedi weaved out of the way, batting her staff against his moves against her. Vader, behind Malgus, got to his feet, and slowly approached their continuing duel. Their weapons continued to collide, and Vader shoved his saber straight through Malgus' heart, and kicked his body off the weapon. As he powered down against Satele, she protected herself. Vader drove his weapon downwards in moves similar to what Palpatine used. She avoided it entirely, spinning around him, and he swept his weapon across the ground towards her. It kicked up fire and she raised her wrist to defend herself. Darth pulled his weapon down from the sky, and she pulled her weapon around and blocked it. However, their sabers were driven into the ground, and as he prepared to punch her with his available hand, she launched the Force through his legs and he fell forward. Satele spun around and thrusted both of her hands outwards, and he flipped off the ground through a building behind him. His body crushed through the support beams. The building was already teetering, and Vader was the final strike. Satele turned on a heel and ran away from the falling structure. Vader, underneath, had to brace himself, but Satele didn't stay long enough to make sure he was dead. As far as she was concerned, the Sith Empire had just lost their leader and his apprentice. She did not know what Vader was, but it would haunt her for years to come. The mask would manifest itself in her dreams. As for the Sith Empire and the disciples, they would see the true power of their new leader. Shortly after Satele's departure, the Dark Lord would use the Force to lift the building off of his body and to the side. It wasn't the entire building, but more than enough of it to impress the likes of each of the Marauders that now called themselves his disciples. They may have lost the battle, but Alderaan would be the defining moment for the Sith Empire. A brand new leader would take helm of the regime. The Jedi would believe the Empire was weaker, and Vader had a chance to prove himself as their new emperor. There, of course, would be a few other challengers against Vader, though they never stood a chance. Vader's fight to dominate the Empire wasn't just through brawn, but intelligence, and that all ran through his disciples. It's honestly how Vader preferred it. He trained these 12 Marauders how to be efficient warriors, and they told him everything he needed to know about this galaxy. At their current state, the Sith were in a way the underdogs of the galaxy, a fighting force with greater aspirations than could be simply achieved. The war with the Republic in the original timeline had treaties and so forth, things that the Sith frequently broke so that they could take power for themselves. Vader, with knowledge of how Palpatine's empire grew, started to branch out in ways that the Sith of this era wouldn't have thought of, especially not Malgus. Thanks to gaining a semblance of control over the ancient regime, he was able to dispatch warriors into commando operations. Vader frequently, after earning control, would bring individuals with savviness for galactic events to his flagship and put them into positions to thrive. No longer were the ancient Sith fighting wars to win them in crushing battles, but waging conflict in the political sphere. For example, warriors and soldiers from certain planets like Corellia would infiltrate their government and sabotage it from the inside out. Sometimes, there would be individual Sith that became representatives or senators for a given system. The point, though, was to essentially sow distrust across the Republic. Vader knew, aside from a few select individuals inside the Empire, that he would not be able to take over the Republic the same way Palpatine did. He wasn't even trying to conquer it politically. He wanted to destroy the system and rule the galaxy as its emperor. The next few years of Vader's life as leader of the Sith Empire reflected this. He became more understanding of his greatest opponents on the Jedi side. He also had a feel for his allies, ones that could become traitors. All the while, there were rumors of an eternal emperor, one that had lived for centuries, wishing and praying on the downfall of society. Vader didn't have any confrontations with Valkorin or Vitiate, or whatever he wanted to call himself. That was a powerful opponent, and Vader knew it, but there was no reason to start a conflict with him, unless he or his children encroached on Vader's territory. With years having passed since the Battle of Alderaan, Vader made a name for himself. No longer was he the shadowy figure that lurked behind Palpatine's back and served the Empire he was an heir to. He was the king, the ruler, the most dominant power inside of his own regime. Anyone considered a rival was dealt with. It was his way of maintaining control, and the truth is, Vader loved all of it. The sense of boredom that drove him into flow walking to begin with is something that remained completely absent. Vader had to use every ounce of his brain and his brawn in this era. Things he learned from Palpatine that would have been borderline useless in his own timeline were completely relevant here. Vader cultivated a Sith Empire that, like Palpatine's, was loyalty-based. However, even from the outside perspective, the Sith Lord understood that it would not last forever. If he wanted a long-standing Sith legacy, he needed first an apprentice to trust, and secondly, a group of loyalists that could maintain the illusion of power. Those that served the military could leave or join, but they could never know how fragile power really was. Palpatine's regime, and all of its warlords, knew that without the Emperor, they could make an attempt for power. So brown-nosing and betrayal was not rewarded within his system. He completely overhauled the perspective of the ancient Sith and helped them understand the path to victory. Because out of every Sith the galaxy had ever seen, it had been Sidious and Vader that destroyed the Jedi Order and created an imperial regime unmatched by anything the galaxy had ever seen. They had won the war, and nothing would ever stop them. Of course, Vader didn't know his son was sitting on the Lars homestead the entire time, waiting to blow up a Death Star in the old universe. Vader's movements around the galaxy were watched by the Jedi. He was feared by many of them. Outposts and temples around the galaxy that were hidden by the High Council were clobbered by the Sith Lord. Vader's time as Anakin Skywalker and as the Master of Purging led him to blindsiding Jedi outposts outside of Coruscant. For example, the Temple of Edith or the station on Dantooine weren't widely known locations, places that, as Palpatine's student, he had already visited. This time, though, he used these skirmishes with a couple dozen or sometimes 100 or so Jedi as training for his disciples. They were truly the key here. They were, in all actuality, what the Inquisitors should have been. Unlike the band of Jedi survivors strewn together by Palpatine after the Purge, these 12 Sith were only ever Sith. They believed in the path and lived for the religion of the Ancients. Vader didn't have to coach them into using the dark side because they knew it. He simply gave them the tools to reach their full potential, and it's why they were so devoted to him. He gave them something no other Sith Lord would have ever given them, the ability to find their own power and control it. That was something Vader found so alluring about his new position. He had been starved of one thing. Despite all of his anger and frustrations, Vader had no control over anything, and for someone who had only ever known so little authority, he mastered it in an era of chaos. Despite this, he had his sights on Coruscant and the Jedi Temple. This would be his ultimate chance to prove himself, who he was, and what he was capable of. He might not have had the chance to kill Obi-Wan Kenobi, but the entire Jedi Council of the Ancient Era would suffice. It would be proof to him that he would have been able to defeat Yoda, Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Plo, and the rest of them. Instead of relying exclusively on battle, Vader's attack on the capital started mere weeks after Alderaan. Several political systems collapsed under Sith influence in the core. These little individuals that filled cogs in the system broke it. Whether it be through forcing the media into a specific aisle, scamming elections, or starting culture wars from local governments, it did not matter. The Sith found a means to split people on the Republic, and turn an anti-Sith movement into a group that found value in their attempts to free the galaxy from what they called corruption. It of course was shielding an even more corrupt regime with the promise of a freer galaxy, but that political divide gave Vader the perfect opportunity to strike the dagger into the heart of the Republic. With the system of government crumbling and support fading away from the core, Vader's attack group moved on Coruscant. Unlike with Malgus, where he entered the temple and waited for a shuttle to crash, Vader's assault started with heavy ships crushing through the skyline, and his own group of Sith landing outside the Jedi Temple behind him. Inside the vessel, he gave the Sith their inspiration. Vader told them that this was their moment. Here and now they could decide the fate of the galaxy and of the evil Jedi. This was their chance to eradicate the greatest threat in the universe to their power. Did they want it more than the Jedi? There were a chance that echoed out, and Vader exited the shuttle first, igniting his saber and pointing forward. Everyone, aside from his disciples, rushed the Jedi Temple. Because of the all-out assault on the capital, the Jedi were left unprepared inside their own home. The High Council dispatched warriors to different districts around the city to keep the Sith at bay. They knew something would come for them, but they never expected this many Sith to arrive. Like his attack during Operation Nightfall, Vader entered a besieged temple. Instead of blasters surrounding and executing unprepared Jedi, this was warrior versus knight. Everyone was ready and actively trained for war, and Vader got his first sense of that on Coruscant in the following few duels. These Jedi, like the ones at the outposts and temples he already leveled, were capable of fighting. Maybe it was because of the Jedi purge from his own timeline, but it felt so redundant back in the day, or I guess the future. They were all Padawan level at best, aside from a few select individuals. Here, Vader whipped his saber down on some Jedi and had to immediately turn around and fight others capable of fighting him. He thrived in the high intensity of this, not to mention the extra years of training he had in this era. His blood boiled, and after years of waiting for his moment to prove himself, he got it. The Grand Master attacked him, slinging his lightsaber through the air and down at Vader. The Sith Lord moved out of the way, bashing his weapon down through one of the other opponents and clobbering upwards to defend himself. He outstretched his hand, breaking the neck of a Keldor Jedi and blasted his saber down. The Jedi spun his saber around and rolled it into a position similar to Kenobi's. Vader grinned inside the mask. Finally his moment. He could finally have his revenge. He whipped forward as the Jedi Master used Form 3 to competitively keep his opponent at bay. It only did so much though. Vader batted down and used his metallic hand to grip the man's wrist, twisting the man to the side and slicing into his hip. With the Force, Vader launched the Grand Master across the chamber and turned to a trio of Jedi attacking him. He spun his saber around into Form 5, slicing down into their attacks and overpowering the first of them and ducking the next. The first Jedi Vader attacked. He used their own weapon to block the third attacker. The Master of the Order leapt through the air and Vader pulled the Jedi's wrist out of his socket and shoved his saber through their chest. The limp body would be used as a shield against the others. The Master of the Order leapt through the air, and Vader pulled another Jedi's wrist out of its socket and shoved his saber through their chest. The limp body of this Jedi would be a shield to protect himself. The Master of the Order would believe she killed her brother, and Vader used this weakness to target her and the other. They raised their sabers and attacked simultaneously. Vader's weapon slid between both of them, blocked them at the exact same moment, and with the Force, he launched one of them through the air and into one of his disciples. Vader turned on the other, attacking her, the Master of the Order. As she started moving closer towards victory, the Grand Master's green saber ignited and lunged through the air. Vader pulled the man down and ignited one of the already dead Jedi sabers. The Grand Master's face was eaten by the gold blade of a temple guard. In this, he pulled the Master of the Order down and ripped his saber across her body, ending her life as well. The temple defenses were strong, but they wouldn't last forever. Vader stepped away from the combat to look at the damage. He hated Coruscant, and now, finally, he could watch it burn to the ground. Skyscrapers older than the Republic he once knew tipped over and sent dust clouds into the streets. His hands found his hips, until one of his disciples was thrown past him and rolled across the ground on the temple steps. She held her hand over a bleeding wound on her ribs. Vader turned back to see the saber-staffed descendant of Revan facing him. Satele Shan had been chasing him through the galaxy ever since he was confirmed alive, but he always seemed one step ahead. This for Vader was his final redemption. He'd killed the Grand Master, the Master of the Order, one of which reminding him of Kenobi. Satele was the last individual to have beaten him in battle. But did she really win that? Vader clearly didn't believe so. His saber found his hand and it rung out. Behind Satele, Jedi and Sith continued to try and find victory. Yet even Satele knew the fate of her brethren. Coruscant would be lost, so she needed to defeat Vader. Now, as a side note, Satele was only on Coruscant because Vader attacked much earlier than Malgus would have prior to his death. The two of them swung forward, their sabers collided quickly. Satele whipped the sides of her blade of her staff at Vader, who weaved his single blade between his shoulders to protect himself. She was quick to try and cut through him, but her speed wasn't a problem for the Sith Lord. He continued to pace her. Both had already seen a fair share of this battle. They would be the ones to decide the fate and the longevity of the Sith Empire. Vader used the Force to crush the ground under her, but she steadied her hand, long enough to bat his killing blow from her. She kicked his legs, and that didn't really get anywhere. It was at this moment that she realized her opponent wasn't a man. He was a machine, through and through. Master Shan rolled across the ground and used the Force to try and launch Vader, but he protected himself. Her second attempt came through, indenting the ground beneath him and throwing him from his feet. Satele ripped her saber through the air and dropped from the skies towards him. Vader rolled away, swinging his weapon just hard enough to counter. He pressed himself to his feet and watched her jab one edge of the staff through his side. It was his torso, but still the side of it. He nearly dropped to the ground and she backed away, giving herself some distance before making the final blow. Vader touched his bare skin and raised that same hand to his saber, gripping it with both gloves and readying. They both moved in. Their sabers collided, and speedily, she shot a strike at his legs that he parried, before deflecting the following edge of her staff away. Vader dropped his saber through her attack and pulled backwards, cutting through her staff and sending both edges flying to the other side of her. Satele's eyes shot open, and she pulled her hands around to palm his next strike with the Force. But Vader, upon swinging down, deignited his saber and used all of his pain and strength to shove his Force back at her. Energy on either side rose up. Both Force adepts tried to break the other, and the ground beneath them quaked. The disciple still on the steps watched Vader hovering over his opponent, break her down into the ground, before pulling his saber and shoving it through her chest, ending the line of Revan. The moment was silent. Vader extinguished the saber and moved to his disciple, helping her off the ground, and telling her to join her brothers and sisters. The Jedi were about to be destroyed. The Sith Marauder nodded her head and rushed in. Again, Vader found his hips, and he watched Coruscant crumble. The age of Emperor Vader started the same day the Jedi Temple fell. Instead of using it as a palace and staying within it, the imagery of the Jedi would be wiped from the face of the galaxy. Lord Vader only continued his assault on the rest of the Republic from there. Nothing could or would stop him. Similarly to his first few years inside the ancient days, he would build his empire around loyalty and strength. The disciples, his most loyal members, were the key, and as he promised upon his entry to the new era, they'd be given control over entire portions of the galaxy in service to him. In a way, it mimicked the Moff system that Palpatine established, this time with capable Force users. Now, as things go with the Sith, there would be infighting. And there was also one truth Vader understood because of Palpatine. The Force would always want to respond, and thus Vader went out of his way to make sure that firstly, his disciples, and secondly, his Sith Empire understood the Force itself. This sect of an imperial regime could not be corrupted, and by removing individuals like Vitiate from the picture, by trapping his soul inside of a holocron and slaughtering his children, there were lesser pulls for the Sith to resort to their roots. Of course, the odd individual here or there would, but Vader didn't give them the opportunity to be consumed by greed. Loyalty won. Individuals who remained loyal were honored. Those that weren't faced torture and execution. To understand the Force is to understand how to manipulate it. That was also his lesson. The galaxy itself would struggle with this new leadership. But hey, Darth Vader wasn't that bad. He at least got rid of slavery. Aside from that though, he wasn't the administrator that his master was. Emperor Vader controlled the galaxy through stratocracy. There were several chances for systems to find loyalty and face lesser punishments. It was a good deal. Sell your soul to the devil and remain unharmed. That was the will of the Sith, imposed on a galaxy that refused to fight it. Vader's legacy, though, would not end with the destruction of the Jedi. On Mustafar, he went out of his way to construct an incredible palace for himself. The cave from which he returned would be protected at all costs, and he would ensure that Naboo survived everything. Because if there ever was a day that flow walking ended, he wanted to make sure that Palpatine suffered for what he did to him. In the ancient era, there would be an apprentice to Vader, an individual that rose from the ranks of the disciples to become the prodigal son or daughter. This would become the time-honored tradition of the Sith, so that once Vader did die of his natural causes, he would be remembered but also followed. The apprentice, of course, became the Sith Lord, and the disciples chose another of the thousands of other Sith in the galaxy to fill their missing rank. It would mimic the rule of two, just with 13 members, technically 14 including the Master and the Apprentice. That was the greatest part though. Vader's flow walk ended the day he died. That's when the Emperor returned. Vader woke up on Mustafar, as if not a day nor a minute had passed. He rose through the chambers of a much larger Sith cathedral, a castle that encompassed acres of land, with holocrons, rituals, and a home for the modern disciples. When Vader rose from his tomb, as he predicted he would, he had the honor of meeting a Palpatine that never received training from Plagueis. This was a Palpatine that, thanks to Naboo remaining untouched, never saw the Clone Wars or an opportunity to get ahead. One of the most powerful beings of his time was just imprisoned, tortured every day since the moment he was found. Palpatine was a much older man by this point, and Vader would continue to torture him to make sure that the individual felt everything he deserved. At the end, though, Vader would assume a godly status amongst his peers. The Sith Empire changed in many ways. In some ways, it became a lot less strict and almost passive. It was still a stratocracy, but Vader's return nearly 3,000 years after he first arrived would see the Sith Empire chasing new goals. New galaxies should be conquered, and with new tech advancements in the last 3 millenniums, it was within his hands. The control that Vader always sought ended up becoming the one thing he could not lose. This Sith regime remembered Vader, the Emperor, and then of course championed the Second Coming. Vader, the conqueror of galaxies. And that, my friends, is screwed up. Special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about this. This is grim. It's dark. It is another dark story. I wanted to put Vader into a place where you could just kind of see him go crazy. Vader is usually referred to as one of the most talented, if not the most gifted Sith in Sith history. And it was fun pinning him up against someone like Malgus. I had considered putting him back with Revan, but I thought it'd be more interesting to go with Malgus. I know Malgus is kind of a theme that I usually run with. I thought it would be a much more entertaining duel, and I think it works out. Vader taking over the Sith Empire isn't just a brutalistic kind of approach. I wanted him to have, the elements of what he learned with Palpatine and kind of implementing that. I kind of like that he has his own Inquisitor unit that he actually cares for, instead of it being like a bunch of guys that he just kind of wants to kill but he can't. And I really like the position of Darth Vader being this like genuine champion of battle, like just this guy that's unstoppable. And really that the only reason any of this starts is because he kind of got bored. Like he just had all this talent sitting there and he wasn't doing anything except for fighting like the odd knight or Padawan here or there. So it was fun to kind of put him into a situation where he's being challenged by people he thinks are worthy of his time. Like he wouldn't think someone like Kanan is worth his time, but someone like, Satele Shan, he's gonna be like, yeah, this is someone worth my fight because you've been fighting your entire life. Whereas, Kanan was like 13 when the purge happened. No, was he? He was like 15. Kanan was like 15 when the purge happened. And so I also wanted to have him not just end his life in that old era, but have a second coming, so that the flow walk did happen. The flow walk just didn't fully finish because he didn't finish the ritual to figure out how to do it. The flow walk didn't finish until he died in the old timeline. So I thought it'd be like a fun way to tie it off with him having like a second coming and the Sith seeing him as this Messiah, the chosen one, this Messiah figure. So hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.